She did not weep at the altar. She screamed, "I won't marry him. I don't care what any of you say." Evelyn Boon's voice tore through the quiet church like a rifle shot, raw and desperate, her dark eyes blazing with a fury that had nowhere left to go. Two councilmen gripped her arms, steering her toward the altar, as though she were property to be transferred. Not a woman still wearing black for her husband murdered 6 days ago, not yet cold in the ground. At her skirt, her 5-year-old son Noah clung with small, white-knuckled fists, sobbing into the fabric. "Don't make Mama marry the bad man. Please don't make her." At the altar, the man they were forcing her toward, Colt Maddox, stood with his hand balled into fists at his sides, jaw set like stone eyes, carrying the weight of a debt he couldn't outrun. He didn't want to be here any more than she did, but Clayton Boon had saved his life, and the dead don't release their hold on the living, not when honor is the chain. The preacher opened his Bible. Evelyn's tears fell like rain on dry Montana earth, and in the little church of Red Hollow, the most unwanted wedding in the territory's history began. If you're watching this story, please subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's go back to Colt and Evelyn and the choice that changed everything. The ceremony lasted 8 minutes. Nobody clapped. Nobody smiled. The 6 town councilmen seated in the front pew nodded to one another with the quiet satisfaction of men who had just closed a profitable deal, which Colt Maddox understood with cold clarity was exactly what this was. A transaction, a signature on a deed dressed up in holy words in a black mourning dress. The moment the preacher whispered the final benediction, Evelyn wrenched her hand from Colt's grip as though his touch had burned her up. "Maddox," the preacher offered gently, his voice the practiced softness of a man accustomed to difficult moments. "Mrs. Boon?" Evelyn's correction came out sharp as a winter wind off the Beartooth Range. She turned on her heel and walked down the aisle without a backward glance, her black skirt trailing behind her like a shadow that refused to lift. Noah scrambled after her, his small boots striking the wooden floor in urgent, echoing beats. Colt stood alone at the altar. Mayor Elias Hutchkins lumbered toward him, a thick silver-haired man whose watch chain strained across his vest like a bridge under too much weight. He dropped a heavy hand on Colt's shoulder with the practiced warmth of a man who had learned to mimic sincerity. "You did the right thing, Maddox. Clayton would have wanted this." Colt's jaw tightened. "You didn't know what Clayton wanted. The boy needs a father. The ranch needs protection." Hutchkins leaned in, dropping his voice to something conspiratorial. "And you owed Clayton your life. We all know it. This squares things." Colt looked at the mayor the way he'd looked at 100 men like him over the years, men who made decisions for other people's lives and called it mercy. "Nothing squares," he said quietly. He walked past Hutchkins and out into the Montana sun. Outside Red Hollow's main street, baked in the late morning heat dust, hanging motionless in the air. Evelyn was already at the wagon, climbing to the seat with Noah pressed against her side. She didn't wait. She snapped the reins and the horses lurched forward, carrying her away without a word or a glance. Colt watched them go. Then he untied his sorrel mare from the hitching post, swung into the saddle, and followed at a distance the way he'd always followed trails. Alone, watching, never quite arriving. The Boone Ranch sat 3 miles outside town, cradled against the foothills, where the grass still grew thick and green despite the summer drought. It was good land, rich land, the kind of land men had killed for across 100 years of American history, and the kind of land men were still killing for now. When Colt rode up the long dirt lane and dismounted at the front gate, Evelyn was already inside the house. The door was shut. Noah stood on the porch, 5 years old, arms crossed, chin lifted, the fierce, heartbreaking posture of a boy trying to be a wall. "You can't come in," Noah said. Colt tied his mare to the rail and moved toward the steps at an unhurried pace. "Your mama might have different thoughts on that. She doesn't want you here, nobody does. That include you." Noah's dark eyes, so much like his father's, didn't waver. "Especially me." Colt stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He'd faced down armed men without flinching. He'd stared into the barrel of a rifle with a steadier pulse than most men felt eating breakfast. But this child's grief, worn like armor, cut somewhere deeper than any bullet he'd ever taken. "Your pa was a good man," Colt said carefully. "Better than most. Nobody's taking his place." "I'm not trying to." "Then why are you here?" Colt thought of the truth, the whole weight of it, the story he hadn't told anyone in 3 years. Because your father could have destroyed me and chose not to. Because debt doesn't die when a man does. Because I owe him everything and I don't know any other way to pay it back. But you didn't say that to a grieving boy. Because your mama needs help running this ranch, Colt said instead. And I made a promise. Promises don't mean nothing. Noah spat, his voice cracking at the edges. My pa promised he'd come home. Before Colt could answer, the front door swung open. Evelyn stood in the doorway, still wearing her funeral dress, dark hair pulled back with a severity that made her face look carved from stone. She looked at her son with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and fierce love. Noah, inside. But Ma, inside now. Noah shot Colt one final look, hatred and hurt twisted together into something almost unbearable, then disappeared into the house. Evelyn stepped onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind her. She crossed her arms, creating a distance between them that had nothing to do with feet and inches. I want the rules clear, she said. All right. You sleep into the bunkhouse. You take your meals with the ranch hands. You don't speak to Noah unless it's necessary. She paused, and for just a fraction of a second, her composure faltered, a tremor in the jaw quickly suppressed. And you don't touch anything that belonged to Clayton. Colt nodded slowly. Anything else? Yes. Her eyes met his, and for the first time he saw, past the anger, to what lay beneath it, not weakness, but bone-deep exhaustion. This woman hadn't slept since they'd brought her husband home draped over a saddle. Don't pretend this is real. The town council wanted a name on the deed to keep this land protected from legal vultures. That's all this is. A signature, not a marriage. Understood. Do you... She stepped forward and he caught the faint scent of lavender, something soft and out of place in all this hardness. Because I've seen how men like you operate. You think eventually I'll soften. That gratitude will become something else. Her voice sharpened. It won't. I'm not expecting anything from you, Colt said quietly. Good, because you'll get nothing. She turned to go. Colt spoke anyway. I knew your husband. Evelyn froze. Her hand rested on the door handle, knuckles pale. She didn't turn around. Not well, Colt continued, but I knew him, and he was the kind of man who'd have wanted his family protected. So that's what I'm doing, nothing more. A long-waited silence. Then do it from a distance. She went inside, the door closed. Colt stood alone on the porch for a long moment, listening to the wind move through the grass, and then he picked up his saddlebag and walked toward the barn. The bunkhouse sat behind the main house, a low-weathered structure with a sagging roofline and a door that scraped the floorboards when you opened it. When Colt pushed inside, 5 ranch hands looked up from a card game spread across a rough-hewn table. The 6th bunk was empty sheets folded military tight. Where's your other man? Colt asked. The oldest of them, a grizzled, tobacco-stained veteran named Dutch, with forearms like fence posts and eyes the color of old iron spat into a tin can. Quit this morning, said he wasn't working for some stranger who married his way into the boss's bed. I didn't marry my way into anything. Ain't how the town sees it, said a younger hand named Tommy, thin as fence wire with eyes that never quite stopped moving. They're saying you swooped in the second Clayton died, that maybe you had something to do with it. The air in the bunkhouse got very still. Colt's expression didn't change. But something cold and deliberate settled into his chest, the kind of calm that precedes a reckoning. That's a dangerous thing to suggest. Ain't me suggesting it, Tommy said quickly, raising both hands. Just telling you what's being said. Colt dropped his saddlebag on the empty bunk. He looked at each man in turn, slow and unhurried, the way you checked a room for exits before you sat down. Let me be clear, he said. I had nothing to do with Clayton Boon's death. I'm here because the town council arranged this marriage, and I had my own reasons to agree. Those reasons are mine, but I'm not here to steal from anyone, not from that woman, not from that boy. Understood. The men exchanged glances. Dutch spat again, then studied Colt the way an old dog studies a stranger, measuring withholding judgment. You any good with cattle? Good enough. Can you fix a broken fence line? Done it 1,000 times, sons. You know how to handle a rifle when raiders come calling. Colt met the old man's gaze without blinking. I know how to handle worse than raiders. Dutch held the stare for a 5 count, then gave a short, grudging nod. Right, you pull your weight, we'll give you a fair shake. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. But that woman in the main house, she's been through hell. Her boy, too. You make it worse, and town council or no town council, you'll answer to us. Fair enough, Colt said. He spent the rest of that afternoon working the southern fence line with Dutch and 2 of the hands checking posts and mending wire under a sun that beat down without mercy. It was honest hard work, the kind that kept a man's hands busy enough that his mind had to work on its own, and Colt's mind kept circling back to the same thing. Clayton Boon had been shot in the back during a midnight ambush 2 weeks earlier. The official account placed him near Canyon Ridge, tracking cattle rustlers when someone got the drop on him. But Clayton had been a cavalry scout before he pinned on a badge a man who read terrain the way most men read a newspaper, who never rode a trail without watching what rode parallel to him. A man like that didn't get caught from behind by accident. Something about the whole story felt wrong, like a door hung slightly off plumb looked fine until you tried to open it. When Colt returned to the barn at dusk, he found Noah sitting on a hay bale in the corner, arms folded, watching him with the same wary intensity he had brought to every interaction since Colt arrived. You're supposed to be in the house, Colt said. I can sit where I want. Your mama know you're out here. Noah didn't answer. He just watched Colt unsaddle the mare with measuring eyes. You're not staying, Noah finally said. It wasn't a question. It was hope wearing the costume of certainty. Colt hung the saddle on its rack. For now I am. Why you don't love my ma? You don't even know her. You're right. The honesty seemed to catch the boy off guard. He blinked, recalibrated. Then why? Colt turned to face him, crouching down to bring himself to eye level. You ever owe somebody something? Something so big you can't walk away from it, even if you want to? Noah's brow furrowed. Like a debt. Like a debt. You owed my pa money, not money, something more important. What? Colt held the boy's gaze. Your pa saved my life once. I never got the chance to pay him back. So I'm paying you and your mama instead. Noah was quiet for a moment, then, we don't need your charity. Maybe not, but I need to settle my accounts. I don't believe you. Noah's voice rose, the fragile control slipping. My pa never talked about you. If he saved you, he would have told us. Your pa was a private man. Not everyone tells all their stories. I think you're lying. I think you're here for the land, like everyone says. The boy's voice broke on the last word. Like everyone always says. Noah. Evelyn's voice came from the barn doorway, quiet and firm as a hand laid on his shoulder. Get inside. The boy flinched, then ran, giving Colt a wide berth and not looking back. Evelyn stood in the doorway a moment longer, her silhouette dark against the golden dusk light from the yard, then turned and walked back toward the house without a word. Colt straightened. He gave her the space she needed. He was good at that. He'd been giving people space his whole life, even when what he wanted was to close the distance. That night, he lay on the narrow bunkhouse cot while the other hands snored around him, staring at the ceiling and listening to Montana breathe. Through the single small window, he could see one light burning in the main house in what must have been Clayton's old office. A single yellow rectangle in the darkness. She was still awake. He wasn't sure why that mattered to him as much as it did. Colt rose before dawn. Sleep had never been a reliable thing. 3 years of living on the edge of his own name had burned the easy rest out of him. He dressed in the dark, slipped outside into the gray, pre-dawn stillness, and walked toward the main house to begin the morning check. He'd gone perhaps 15 steps when he noticed it. The door to Clayton's office stood open. Just a sliver, but open. Evelyn never left doors open. In the single day he'd known her, he'd already understood that about her. She was a woman of closed doors and strict borders. Every threshold in her life was deliberately maintained. He approached slowly, one hand drifting toward the pistol at his hip out of old habit. When he reached the doorway and had looked inside, he found Evelyn surrounded by devastation papers scattered across the floor, and desk, a ledger left open with pages torn and their edges blackened by fire, a cash box forced open and empty, a desk drawer that had been pried from its hinges. She looked up. Her eyes were red from crying or from a sleepless night, or from both, all layered together until there was no distinguishing one from another. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded. Door was open. Thought something was wrong. "Nothing's wrong. Get out." But he'd already seen the letter in her hand. A single page of paper crumpled as though it had been gripped too tightly for too long, the handwriting sprawling and urgent, the penmanship of a man in a hurry or a man who was afraid. "What is it?" Colt asked quietly. I said, "Get out." "Mrs. Boon, don't call me that." She stood abruptly, the letter crumpling further in her fist. "You have no right to be in here. No right to see this. No right to—" Her voice cracked, fractured, fell. She turned away, her shoulders trembling. Colt should have left, should have respected the line she'd drawn in the dirt between them and stayed on his side of it. But something in the way she held that letter, the white-knuckled, desperate grip of a woman trying to hold together the last piece of something she'd already mostly lost, kept him rooted to the spot. "Whatever it is," he said, "maybe I can help." She laughed, a single ragged, bitter sound. "Help!" She spun to face him, and her composure shattered all at once, tears streaming, jaw-trembling, voice stripped to its raw edges. "You don't even know what you've walked into." "Then tell me." The silence stretched. Something moved behind her eyes, the calculation of a woman measuring risk against need and finding the math come out differently than she'd expected. "Clayton wasn't investigating rustlers," she said finally, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When he died, he was investigating fraud. Land fraud. Someone was stealing property across this whole valley. Forging deeds. Taking land from families who couldn't afford lawyers and couldn't read the legal language well enough to fight back in court." She paused, swallowed. He found out who was responsible. Colt's chest tightened. "Who? I don't know." Her voice cracked on the words. "Because the night before he was killed, he destroyed his own notes, burned his evidence, like he was trying to protect something, or protect us, from knowing." She thrust the letter toward him. "He hid this." Colt took it. The handwriting was hurried, slanting across the page like a man writing by failing light or failing time. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't trust the council. Don't sell the land. Keep Noah safe. Tell him I love him. Find someone you can trust, someone outside Red Hollow. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you more. I'm sorry for everything." Colt read it twice, then once more slowly, letting each line settle into place. "When did you find this?" "This morning. Hidden inside a book on the shelf." She wrapped her arms around herself the way people did when they were trying to hold their own shape. "Half his records are missing, burned or stolen. I can't tell which. I don't know what he found. I don't know how to find it again. You think whoever killed him took the records. I think—" her voice trembled. "I think my husband discovered something that was worth killing him for. And I think the town council pushing this marriage wasn't about tradition or protecting the ranch. I think they wanted someone here they could control, someone who wouldn't ask questions." Colt looked at her, really looked at her, past the grief and the fury and the carefully constructed walls, and saw something he hadn't expected: a sharp, methodical intelligence, working underneath all of it, piecing together a picture, even as the pieces kept getting taken away. "You think I'm part of it," he said. "I don't know what to think." She held his gaze steadily. "You show up out of nowhere. You claim Clayton saved your life, but you won't say when or how. The council practically forces this marriage. And now you're here in his office asking questions. A beat. Prove me wrong. Tell me the truth about this debt." Colt was quiet for a long moment. The story was one he'd buried so deep he'd almost stopped being able to find it himself. But Evelyn Boon's eyes demanded honesty the way dry ground demands rain, urgently and without room for substitutes. "3 years ago," he began, "I was running from a murder charge up in Wyoming. I didn't kill the man, but the evidence said otherwise, and in Wyoming territory, the evidence is what decides whether you live or hang." He paused, steadied himself. "My horse broke a leg in a storm 20 miles from here. I was on foot, half frozen, when Clayton found me." Evelyn listened without moving, without speaking. Only her eyes gave anything away. "He could have arrested me right there," Colt continued. "The bounty on my head would have set him up for months. Instead, he took me to a line shack, gave me food and dry clothes, and said he'd look into the Wyoming case himself. And did he? 6 months later, he'd proved the real killer was the son of a wealthy rancher, the kind of man who could make evidence appear and disappear depending on who he paid. Clayton contacted the Wyoming marshal, laid out everything he'd found. They cleared my name. Evelyn's expression shifted fractionally. Why didn't he tell anyone? He said a man deserves a fresh start without the whole world knowing his history first. Colt's voice was quieter now, the words costing him something. He told me to ride on, make a new life. Said if I ever needed anything, I knew where to find him. But you didn't come back. I was trying to be the man he thought I could be, trying to stay clear of trouble. But when the word came that he'd been killed, that you and Noah needed help, Colt's jaw tightened. I couldn't ignore it, not after what he did. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the ones before it. Outside, the sun was beginning to work its way over the eastern ridgeline, painting the office in shades of amber and gold. Dust motes drifted through the light like things that had always been suspended there. Finally, Evelyn spoke. If you're telling the truth, then you're not here to steal the land. No. And you might actually give a damn about finding who killed Clayton. I do. She studied him for a long, measured moment. Then she made the decision that would change everything. Then help me find the truth, she said. Not as my husband, as someone who owes Clayton justice. Colt nodded slowly. Where do we start? Evelyn turned back to the desk and began gathering the scattered papers with careful, deliberate hands. We start with the land fraud. Someone in this town has been stealing property, someone powerful enough to arrange a murder and have it called a random ambush. We find them. We find Clayton's killer. That's dangerous. I know. If they killed once, they'll do it again. I know that too. She met his eyes across the desk, and what he saw there wasn't fear, or not only fear. It was the particular kind of resolve that gets forged in people who have already lost what they were most afraid of losing. But I won't let my husband's murder go unpunished. And I won't let whoever did this take my land and my son's future. In that moment, looking at Evelyn Boon in the golden morning light of her dead husband's office, Colt Maddox understood something he hadn't expected to understand for a long time, if ever. This had already stopped being about debt. They spent the next hour working through what remained of Clayton's records, fragments and remnants, the edges of a picture with most of the center burned away. A list of property owners who'd recently sold land under circumstances that didn't quite add up. Notes about irregularities in deed filings, and one name circled in Clayton's handwriting 3 times, the ink pressed hard enough to show through the page. Silas Granger. Who is Bowie? Colt asked. Evelyn's expression shifted, not fear exactly, but the look of someone who has just seen the scale of what they're up against. The wealthiest cattle baron in the territory, she said quietly. He owns half the land between here and the railroad line. He's been buying up properties across the valley for 2 years, supposedly for the railroad expansion. She paused. Clayton thought the purchases weren't legitimate, that Granger was using forged documents to acquire land at a fraction of its real value, then selling it to the railroad at full price. Colt let that land. That's a profitable scheme, and one worth killing to protect. They were still talking through the implications when the office door burst open. Noah stood in the doorway, chest heaving, face the color of chalk. Ma, there's men coming, on horses. A lot of them. Colt was at the window before the boy finished the sentence. In the distance, a group of riders moved toward the ranch at a deliberate, unhurried pace that was somehow more threatening than speed in the way a wolf walks when it knows the prey is already cornered. He counted the silhouettes. 8, maybe more in the tree line. You expecting anyone? He asked. No. He recognized the formation. This wasn't a courtesy call. Get Noah to the cellar, Colt said quietly, turning from the window. Now. I'm not hiding in my own house. Evelyn, his voice was firm without being hard. If this goes bad, Noah needs you alive, please. She hesitated. He could see the war in her face, the widow's pride against the mother's terror. Then she took Noah's hand and moved toward the back of the house. Colt listened to the cellar door open and fall shut. Then he walked out onto the porch, settled his hat, rested one hand casually near his gun, and waited. The riders slowed as they approached the yard, fanning out in a practiced semicircle around the front of the house. Their horses were well-fed and expensive. Their guns were worn with the ease of men who use them regularly. The man in front was tall and broad, wearing a dark suit that looked out of place on horseback, and in no hurry to appear anything other than exactly what it was power made visible. Cold gray eyes moved across the property with the assessing calm of a man calculating what he already considered his. You must be Maddox, the man said. His voice was smooth and unhurried, the voice of a man accustomed to being the last one who needed to speak. I heard about the wedding. Quite the romantic story. Something I can do for you, mister. Granger. Silas Granger swung down from his horse with practiced ease and advanced toward the porch at a leisurely pace like a man walking through his own parlor. Actually, yes. I'm here to make Mrs. Boon, excuse me, Mrs. Maddox, a very generous offer for this property. The property's not for sale. I haven't stated my price yet. Doesn't matter, not for sale. Granger's smile didn't reach his eyes. They never did, Colt suspected, not because the man couldn't smile, but because his eyes were always doing something else. Counting, calculating, measuring exits. You're new to Red Hollow, Granger said, his tone shifting to something paternal and dangerous. Let me explain how things work. The railroad is coming through this valley. Properties in its path become extremely valuable, but only if they're sold at the right time to the right people. A slight pause. I've acquired 12 properties in this area over the past year. This ranch is the last holdout. Sheriff Boone was stubborn about that, refused every offer I made, even threatened to expose certain irregularities in my business practices. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Granger's men shifted in their saddles. Get him killed, Colt said. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to stop breathing. Granger's face didn't move. Careful, Maddox. Accusations like that have consequences. So do midnight ambushes. Sheriff Boone's death was a tragedy, Granger said, each word precise and cold. Rustlers are a plague in this territory. His loss doesn't change the fundamental reality this land will be sold. I'm giving you the opportunity to do it the civilized way. He clasped his hands behind his back. The alternative involves lawyers, tax claims. Debts Sheriff Boone allegedly carried that have a way of coming due at inconvenient times. Foreclosures. I can tie this property in legal proceedings for years. By the time it resolves, you'll have nothing left. The boy will grow up in poverty. He let that settle. And Evelyn, she'll learn, as many widows have, that a woman without protection in the West doesn't last long. Colt looked at Granger for a long, quiet moment. You've made your offer, he said evenly. Now get off this property. Granger studied him with the expression of a man who had just confirmed something he'd suspected. Then he smiled, a slow, predatory thing. You have 1 week to reconsider, he said. After that, things get considerably more complicated. He remounted his horse, turned it with a horseman's ease, and rode. His men followed in tight formation, moving slowly enough to leave an impression, the promise of what was coming, dressed up as a departure. Colt stood on the porch and watched them until the last horse disappeared over the ridge. Then he went inside. Evelyn emerged from the cellar with Noah pressed against her side, her face white but her eyes burning. He's the one, she whispered. Probably, Colt said. He killed Clayton. Probably. He met her gaze steadily. But probably won't hold up in a federal court. We need proof. She pulled Noah against her and looked at Colt across the boy's head, and something passed between them. Not trust yet, not quite. But the beginning of the thing that trust is built from shared stakes, shared danger, and the recognition that they were standing on the same side of a very serious line. Then we find it, she said. Colt nodded. We will. And in the burned gold morning of that Montana summer, with a widow and her son watching him with equal parts wariness and desperate hope, Colt Maddox understood something with complete certainty. He wasn't staying to pay a debt anymore. He was staying to finish something that Clayton Boon had started. Even if it meant going to war with the most powerful man in the territory. Even if it meant burning down everything he'd spent 3 years building for himself. Even if it meant learning for the first time what it felt like to fight for something that actually mattered. The ranch hands gathered in the barn within the hour. Dutch stood with his arms crossed and his tobacco tin clenched in one fist, reading the room the way old soldiers always do, quietly, thoroughly calculating which way the wind was blowing before committing to anything. Tommy sat on an overturned bucket with his leg jittering. The other three, Cole Patterson and a quiet Cherokee-blooded hand everyone just called Wick, held their positions near the barn walls, hats in hands, expressions carefully neutral. So, Dutch said, we going to war? It wasn't a question. Colt met the old man's gaze. Looks that way. Against Silas Granger. Dutch spat into his tin. Man who owns half of the territory and hasn't lost a legal fight in 20 years. Against whoever killed Clayton Boon, Colt said. Granger seems like a good place to start. Tommy shifted on his bucket eyes, darting toward the barn door. No offense, Maddox, but Granger's got 20 hired guns on his payroll. We've even got 6 ranch hands. It's a widow with a kid. That ain't what most people would call even odds. Then leave. Colt's voice was flat without anger. I mean that. Every one of you. This isn't your fight, and I won't hold it against any man who walks. The silence that followed had weight to it. Dutch made the first move. He spat again, resettled his hat on his head, and fixed Colt with those iron gray eyes. Clayton gave me work when nobody else would, he said. Took me on after I came out of Deer Lodge, didn't ask what I'd done, didn't tell me what I owed him for it. Just said, you pull your weight, you got a place here. He looked at the others. We all got a version of that story. One by one the hands nodded, even Tommy, whose hands were trembling slightly at the ends of his wrists. Colt looked at each of them in turn. Right, then we do this smart. We fortify the ranch, double the night watch, nobody rides alone, and every threat Granger makes gets documented. We're building a legal case, not just defending fence line. He paused. What about the law? Red Hollow doesn't have a sheriff anymore. Acting deputies named Cresswell, Dutch said grimly. Man's got Granger's money in his pocket and Granger's boots on his conscience. We're on our own. Colt had expected that. In his experience, the men who most needed to be protected were the last ones the law showed up to protect. Then we're our own law, he said. For now, Chia. Inside the main house, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with Noah across from her. His breakfast untouched, his small hands locked together on the tabletop. He hadn't spoken since Granger left. He just stared at the wall, at his plate, at the middle distance where terrible thoughts lived. Baby, you need to eat, Evelyn said softly. I'm not hungry. Noah, why didn't Pa just sell? The question came out in a burst, ragged at the edges, like something that had been pressing against the inside of him for days and finally found a crack. Why didn't he just give them the stupid land? Then they wouldn't have had to. He couldn't finish it. Evelyn's breath caught. She set down her coffee cup very carefully. Your father was trying to protect people, families who were being cheated out of everything they had. I don't care about other families. Noah's voice cracked on the word. I care about him. He chose strangers over us. That's not what happened. Then why is he dead? The tears came then, sharp and sudden. And why are we stuck with that man outside who doesn't even want to be here? He doesn't love us, Ma. He doesn't even know us. Why do we have to pretend? The kitchen door opened quietly. Colt stood in the frame. From the stillness in his face, Evelyn knew he'd heard. All of it. Noah looked up, saw him, and something broke loose. He shoved back from the table, knocking his chair against the wall. I hate you. The words came out raw and desperate. I hate that you're standing where my pa should be standing, and I hate that you're not him, and I hate that he's dead, and I hate... His voice dissolved into sobbing. He pushed past Colt and ran for the stairs. A door slammed above them. Evelyn stood slowly. I'm sorry, she started. He's right, Colt said quietly. I don't replace his father. I can't, and I won't try to. She looked at him for a moment, surprised by the absence of defensiveness in his voice. Then something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, not yet, but the first relaxation of armor. Have you eaten? She asked. He blinked. Not yet. Sit down. There's coffee and biscuits. It was a strange and fragile thing, this small, ordinary gesture in the middle of everything. Colt sat at the kitchen table at the seat where Clayton Boon had probably sat 1,000 times, and Evelyn poured coffee into a tin cup with hands that still trembled faintly at the wrists. I found something else in Clayton's papers, she said, keeping her voice low as if the walls might be listening. She set down a letter from the Montana Territorial Railroad Commission. They're scheduled to announce the official route through the valley in 3 weeks. Colt saw it immediately. That's Granger's deadline. He needs this land secured before the announcement. After it goes public, the price goes up, and so does the scrutiny. Lawyers, federal observers, journalists. She sat down across from him, which means he's more desperate than he let on. Desperate men make mistakes. Evelyn looked at him. You really believe we can stop him? I believe we can make him bleed enough that he backs down. Colt held her gaze. And if we can't, then we go down fighting. But Noah stays safe whatever happens. I give you my word on that. Something shifted in Evelyn's expression, the same slight, almost involuntary softening he'd seen before gone almost as quickly as it arrived. Why do you care? She asked quietly. Your debt's paid. You showed up, you married me in that church. Nobody would blame you for walking out the back door tonight. I would. That's not an answer. He took a breath. Some truths needed to be pulled out of you like a bad tooth slowly and at some cost. When I was running in Wyoming, he said, and I thought I was going to hang for something I didn't do, I thought about ending it myself, just stopping before they could. He paused. Clayton saved more than my life that night. He saved whatever piece of me was still worth saving. He looked at the coffee in his hands. So no, I can't walk away from this. Not from you and not from Noah. Evelyn's eyes glistened. She looked away quickly, composing herself. Thank you, she whispered, for being honest. Before either of them could say more, Dutch's boots hit the porch at a run. He burst through the door without knocking, which told Colt everything about the urgency before a single word was spoken. Southern fence line's been cut, Dutch said. At least 50 heads scattered into the canyon. And they left a message. He held up a square of paper nailed torn from a fence post. 4 words written in a careless hand. Next time, not cattle. So, the threat changed things. Evelyn's first instinct was the right one. She wanted Noah out of the ranch and into town, anywhere with witnesses, anywhere with walls thicker than a widow's grief between her son and Granger's hired guns. Colt understood the impulse. He'd have felt the same. But he'd also seen enough of how men like Granger operated to know that leaving was exactly what the cattle baron wanted. The moment Evelyn abandoned the property, it was legally and practically conceded. Granger's lawyers would file abandonment claims within 24 hours. She'd spend the next 5 years fighting paperwork in courts he owned. This ranch is the safest place for Noah right now, Colt told her, and he meant it. We control it. We know every approach, every outbuilding, every place to put a man with a rifle. In town, you've got Granger's eyes on every corner and a deputy who answers to him. Out here, we can see them coming. Evelyn closed her eyes. He could almost watch her process it, weigh it, test it against her fear, come out the other side with something that wasn't comfort, but was at least resolution. Fine, she said, but Noah doesn't leave this house without someone armed beside him, and I want 2 men posted through every night. Done. Over the next 3 days, Granger's harassment was relentless and calculated, the work of someone who knew exactly how much pressure to apply without crossing into the kind of overt violence that might draw outside attention. Granger's riders passed the property line twice daily, making no attempt to conceal themselves. The water tank in the north pasture was found poisoned on the second morning. A second fence section was cut on the third night, this time the eastern boundary sending cattle into the rocky draws, where 3 broke legs and had to be put down. Each incident was documented. Colt kept a running ledger, dates, times, descriptions, the names of Granger's men, when he could identify them through Dutch's memory. He was building something. He needed it to hold. At night, after the hands were settled and Noah was asleep, he and Evelyn worked in Clayton's office by lamplight, sorting through what remained of the dead sheriff's records. It was painstaking, quiet work, the kind that required a certain tolerance for each other's silence. And over those 3 nights, Colt discovered that Evelyn's silences were as readable as most people's speech. He was learning the language of her without quite intending to. This one, she said on the 3rd night, holding a deed to the lamplight with both hands. The Martinez property. Elena Martinez supposedly signed this deed 6 months ago, sold to Granger for $800. Colt leaned forward. That's low for grazing land. It's robbery. Evelyn set the deed on the table between them. But look at the date. Elena Martinez died 2 years ago. Her son Miguel inherited the property. She looked up. Her signature is dated after her death. The air in the room changed. That's forgery, Colt said. This is forgery. She pulled 3 more documents from the stack. And this, at least 4 properties, all from families who couldn't read English well enough to understand what they were signing or who were told the documents were something else entirely. Her hands were shaking, but her voice had gone very steady, the way voices do when anger has finally burned through all the grief that was covering it. This is what Clayton found. This is what got him killed. Colt looked at the documents spread between them. Evidence. Real evidence. The kind that federal courts could act on. We need to get this to someone outside Red Hollow, he said. A federal marshal. Someone Granger can't reach. The nearest federal office is in Billings. 2 days' ride. Then one of us goes. Not me. Evelyn met his gaze. I need to be here. If I leave, Granger moves on the ranch. And if he suspects anyone is heading to Billings with evidence, she left the rest unspoken. He understood the calculation. He didn't like it, but he understood it. He was about to say he'd go himself, leave before first light, ride hard, be back in 4 days, when the sound came from upstairs. A crash. Then Noah's scream. Colt took the stairs in 3 strides, gun out before he reached the top. He hit Noah's room with his shoulder and came in low, scanning, and found the boy standing in the corner of his room, arm iron and bleeding from a cut below the elbow, a rock the size of a fist on the floor amid a cascade of broken glass from the shattered window. A note was tied around the rock with twine. Colt picked it up, unfolded it, read it aloud in a voice stripped flat. Last warning. Sell or lose everything. Evelyn pushed past him to Noah, pulling the boy into her arms, checking the cut with her fingers. Not deep, just frightening. Just a deliberate reminder that Granger could reach inside their walls whenever you chose. Noah sobbed against his mother's shoulder, the shock hitting him now that the immediate fear had passed. That's it. Evelyn's voice had gone very quiet, which was somehow worse than shouting. We're done waiting. Tomorrow morning we ride to Granger's ranch and we confront him. That's suicide. I don't care. Evelyn. He said her name like a hand placed on her shoulder. You walk onto Granger's property making accusations, he shoots you before you get 10 words out. He's already killed once. You think he'll hesitate with no witnesses and no evidence in hand? Then what do you suggest? Her eyes blazed. We wait until they come through that door, until Noah gets hurt worse than a cut on his arm. I suggest we be smart about this. Smart got my husband killed. The words landed like a slap. The silence after them was the hard-wounded kind. Noah cried quietly in his mother's arms. Outside, the Montana night was absolute, no sound, no wind, just the vast dark that had a way of making every problem feel both larger and more final than it was. Colt looked at the boy and something cracked open in his chest, some defense he had been maintaining without quite realizing it. 3 years of careful distance. 3 years of keeping himself from caring enough to be hurt. You won't lose him, he said quietly. I promise you, Evelyn. You won't lose him. She looked up at him, tears on her face, fury in her eyes, and underneath both terror, raw and honest and human. Don't make promises you can't keep. I keep my promises. They looked at each other across the boy's bent head for a long moment. Something passed between them that neither of them had words for yet. From downstairs, Dutch's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Maddox, riders coming in fast. 6 horses, moving hard from the south, fanning as they crossed the yard. Colt recognized the man in front, Pike Granger's lieutenant, a professional gunfighter with cold, flat eyes and the easy posture of a man who had shot people in the back and slept well afterward. Evening, Maddox, Pike called from horseback, one hand resting on his pistol with theatrical casualness. Mr. Granger wants his answer. Answer's no, same as it was 3 days ago. That's unfortunate. Pike's smile was the smile of a man who has never needed to worry about consequences. Mr. Granger's patience is a limited resource. Then he's going to have a bad week. Pike's men spread across the yard, positioning with practiced efficiency. The ranch hands tensed on the porch rifles, not yet raised but ready. You're outnumbered, Pike said. Count again. From the barn, 3 hands emerged with leveled rifles. From the corner of the bunkhouse, 2 more. Colt had positioned them before dark, not because he'd known tonight would happen, but because he'd known something would. Pike's smile tightened. The calculations shifted behind his eyes. This doesn't change anything, he said, pulling his reins. Granger owns this valley. You're just delaying what's inevitable. Maybe, Colt said, but I'm real good at delaying. Pike pulled his horse around. He looked at Colt one last time, the look of a man filing something away for future use. Next time we meet, he said, it won't be for talking. Then he was gone, his men falling in behind him. Colt stood on the porch until the sound of hooves faded completely into the dark. Then he let out a slow breath and turned to find Dutch watching him with an expression that might under different circumstances have been respect. "They'll come back," Dutch said. "Yeah," Colt agreed, "but now they know we're not easy." "Being not easy ain't the same as winning." "No," Colt said, "but it buys time." He found Noah in the barn loft the next morning, hiding in the hay with his knees pulled to his chest and his face turned toward the wall. The boy heard Colt's boots on the ladder, but didn't move. "Your mama know you're out here," Colt said. "She said not to go anywhere, but I'm not really anywhere." A beat. "I'm just here." Colt climbed up and settled himself in the hay a few feet from the boy, giving him space. Outside, the morning was clear and bright, the Beartooth Range painted sharp against a blue sky. "It's my fault," Noah said, very quiet, very certain. Colt went still. "What is Pa dying?" Noah's voice was barely above a whisper. "The night he got shot, we had a fight. I told him I hated him for always being gone, for always choosing work over us. He left angry. He pressed his face harder against his knees, and he didn't come back." Colt was silent for a moment. Then he moved closer and spoke carefully. "Noah, look at me." The boy turned. His eyes were red and swollen, his face carrying a weight that no child's face should ever have to carry. "What happened to your father was not your fault. Not even a little. You don't know that." "Yes, I do, because the men who killed him planned it. They set it up in advance. They waited for him. Nothing you said or didn't say that night would have changed a single thing they did." Colt held the boy's gaze. "Your pa knew you loved him." "You know how I know that?" Noah shook his head. "Because I told my own pa I wished I'd never been born the last time I saw him before he died. And you know what he knew I didn't mean it, because that's what fathers know. It's part of the job." Noah was quiet for a long moment. The morning moved around them, a hawk turning high circles above the south pasture, the distant sound of Dutch calling to the cattle in the lower field. "Did you ever stop feeling bad about it?" Noah asked. Colt considered lying, decided against it. "No, but I learned to live alongside it. And I learned that the best way to honor someone who's gone is to protect what they loved." He looked at the boy steadily. "Your pa loved you and your mama more than anything he ever owned or built. So protecting you, that's how I'm honoring him." Noah was quiet for a very long time. Then almost imperceptibly, he leaned sideways and rested his head against Colt's arm. Colt didn't move, didn't speak, barely breathed. They sat like that until Evelyn's voice floated up from the yard calling them both to breakfast. Everything changed that afternoon. Colt and Dutch were working the northern pasture when they heard the shots flat and sharp from the south carried on the wind with that particular urgency that rifle fire always has when it isn't practice. They rode hard. They found Tommy pinned behind a rock outcropping, three of Granger's riders, working him from cover with methodical patience. The young hand had blood running down his left thigh, and his rifle was nearly empty. Colt didn't hesitate. He cut wide, came in at an angle that pulled the rider's attention off Tommy and onto the new threat. Dutch flanked from the east. The exchange was brief and brutal, two of Granger's men down the third breaking for the canyon at a dead run. "Get Tommy back to the house," Colt told Dutch, already turning his horse. "Colt, wait." But he was already gone, tracking the fleeing rider through the scrub and rock at a controlled, relentless pace. He knew this country now. He'd learned it the way he learned every place he'd ever stayed more than a week, the draws and the rises, the false flats and the sudden drops. He caught the man on the canyon rim. The rider's horse had stumbled on loose shale, throwing him into a scramble. He came up with his pistol, clearing leather, but Colt was already there close enough that the shot from his rifle knocked the gun cleanly from the man's hand without taking the hand with it. He had the rider on the ground with a knee on his chest before the pistol had finished clattering down the rock face. "Who sent you?" The man laughed, wheezing, blood at the corner of his mouth. "Go to hell." Colt pressed harder. "Granger." "You're already dead, Maddox. You and the widow and the brat. He's coming tonight with everyone, going to burn that ranch to the foundation, and—" He stopped himself. "Tonight," Colt said. The man said nothing. Colt hit him once short and precise, and the man's eyes rolled. He came back, a few seconds later blinking, and found Colt's face 6 inches from his. Tonight, Colt said again. The man swallowed. With everyone, he whispered. You can't stop it. Colt tied him to a juniper, checked the knot twice, and rode back to the ranch at a dead run. He hit the house at full gallop and was off the horse before it had stopped moving. Evelyn looked up from where she was working on Tommy's leg wound and read everything she needed to know in his face before he'd said a single word. How long, she asked. A few hours, maybe less. Can we hold them? He looked at the hands, at Tommy's gray face, at Noah on the stairs, listening with Winnie's frightened eyes. No, he said honestly, not if he brings his whole force. We're outnumbered 3-1 and half our men aren't gunfighters. Then what do we do? Colt looked around the room at this house, at the life that had been built here, at the evidence they'd gathered spread across Clayton's office table. We go, he said. We load what matters and we move. Get to somewhere public where Granger can't touch you without witnesses. The church in town. Anywhere with eyes on it. Evelyn's hands stilled on Tommy's bandage. She looked around at the kitchen, the wall of walls, the window where the bare-tooth range filled the glass like a painting. Everything Clayton had built. Everything they'd started to rebuild. Then she looked at Noah. All right, she said quietly. We go. They'd barely started loading the wagon when the barn erupted. The explosion came without warning, a concussive bloom of fire and debris that knocked half of them off their feet and set the horses screaming in their traces. Colt threw himself over Noah as the shockwave rolled through the yard, feeling shrapnel clip his shoulder and something heavy brush past his ear. He came up with his rifle already in his hands. Granger hadn't waited for tonight. Muzzle flashes from the tree line northeast and from the ridge to the south. They were surrounded, at least 15 shooters, maybe more, and the barn was fully engulfed, the fire already reaching for the main house roof. Get to the house, Colt hauled Noah up and pushed him forward, moving in a running crouch as rounds chewed the dirt around their feet. Dutch fall back, everyone in. They made it through the front door in a tumbling mass of bodies. Evelyn slammed the heavy bar across it. Windows shattered in rapid succession. Tommy, still bleeding, dragged himself to a corner and sat with his back to the wall rifle across his knees, faced the particular gray of a man who has used up most of what he had. How many rounds? Colt asked Dutch. Maybe 30 total, between all of us. Through the window staying low below the frame, Colt could see Granger sitting his horse 50 yards out, watching the assault with the detached calm of a man watching cattle work. He wasn't directing. He wasn't excited. He was just watching with the patience of someone who has already accounted for every outcome. Outside, Pike's voice cut through the gunfire. Maddox, send the woman and the boy out. This is between you and Mr. Granger. Colt put 2 rounds through the window as his answer. That's your answer, Pike shouted. That's my answer. Colt agreed to no one in particular. The fire intensified. Bullets punched through the walls with increasing frequency, splintering furniture, shattering the last windows, throwing clouds of plaster from the ceiling. In the corner, Evelyn held Noah against her chest, her body curved around his, her face pressed against the top of his head. The boy's hands gripped her arms with his full strength. I'm scared, Ma. I know, baby. Her voice was steady. It cost her everything to make it that way. I know. Dutch dropped to one knee beside Colt. They're gathering for a rush. 2 minutes, maybe 3. Colt looked at the door, at the windows, at Tommy barely conscious in the corner, at Noah who looked up from his mother's arms and met Colt's eyes with the particular clarity that terrified children sometimes find a kind of stripped-down essential attention. Everything unnecessary burned away. There's a tunnel, Noah said. The word landed in the burning bullet-torn room like water on a fever. What? Colt was across the floor in 2 steps, crouching in front of the boy. A tunnel. Noah's voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse from smoke and fear. Pa showed me. He said it was for emergencies. He made me promise not to tell. A beat. But this is an emergency. Evelyn stared at her son. Clayton never told me, he said some secrets were only for me and him. Noah's face crumpled slightly. I think he knew something bad might happen. Where? Colt said. The pantry, behind the shelves. Dutch was already moving. He dragged a crate of flour aside, then a sack of cornmeal, exposing the back wall of the pantry. What looked like ordinary wood paneling revealed itself on closer inspection to be a false panel fitted into the frame with careful craftsmanship, no gap at the edges. A small iron ring, barely visible, was set into one board. Key, Colt said. Pa kept it in the bottom of his desk drawer, the one on the left. Evelyn ran for the office. Outside, Pike was calling the rush. They could hear the voices gathering, the sound of boots hitting ground. A bullet came through the wall 6 inches above Dutch's head and buried itself in the pantry door. Evelyn was back in 40 seconds. She pressed the small iron key into Colt's hand. He fit it to the lock. It turned on the first try, and the panel swung inward on oiled hinges, revealing a shaft of darkness and a ladder descending into earth. Cool air breathed up from below. Old air, but clean. "Where does it go?" Colt asked Noah. "Old mine shaft near the canyon. Pa built it during the Indian Wars." Noah looked at the opening with something between fear and resolve. He said it was so we could run without being seen. Evelyn went first, lowering herself onto the ladder with Noah wrapped around her back. Dutch helped Tommy to the opening. The wounded hand was barely conscious, but he gripped the rungs with both hands and descended in slow, painful increments. The other hands followed. Colt was last. He pulled the panel closed behind him just as he heard the front door give way, the bar's splintering boots flooding the floor above, voices in sharp, angry command. "They're gone. Find them. Search every room." He descended the ladder in darkness and moved. The tunnel was narrow as a coffin and smelled of damp earth and old iron. Colt moved in a half-crouch, one hand on the rough stone wall, following the sound of the others ahead of him. Noah had stopped whimpering. He was breathing hard, but controlled the particular bravery of a child who has decided the fear is still less than the alternative. Behind them, the panel was discovered. He heard it open above, heard the first boots on the ladder. "They're following," Dutch hissed from somewhere ahead. "Keep moving," Colt said, "fast and quiet." The tunnel seemed to go on forever, long enough for a man's mind to start doing arithmetic he didn't want done. They'd have maybe a 2-minute lead. The tunnel was too narrow to run in. Tommy was slowing them. The men behind them weren't. Then gray light appeared, not daylight, not quite, but the lighter dark of a space that connected to the open world. The tunnel widened at the end and opened into a shallow cave carved into the face of the canyon wall, sheltered by an overhang of sandstone the color of old blood. They came out one by one, blinking in the afternoon glare. Below them, the canyon floor. Above the rim, open sky. From the tunnel behind them, they heard movement. Close. "Run," Colt said. They ran, crossed the canyon floor, through the scrub, into the thick brush that grew along the eastern wall. Shots rang out behind them as Granger's men emerged from the cave mouth, but the brush was dense and the distance was increasing, and the shots went wide. They pushed deeper thorns, pulling at sleeves and hair until the gunfire fell behind them. "We can't keep running," Dutch said when they finally stopped breathing hard. "Tommy's losing blood again. If we don't get him somewhere clean soon." "The Martinez place," Evelyn said suddenly. Everyone looked at her. "It's a mile east, maybe less. Miguel Martinez, the family Granger stole the land from. If we can reach him, we have shelter and a witness." Colt thought fast. "Granger will know about the Martinez property. He stole it. He'll expect us to go there. Do we have another choice?" He looked at Tommy, at Noah, at the sun dropping fast toward the western ridge. "We go," he said, "but we move like we're trying not to be seen. No silhouettes on the ridge, no straight lines. Use the draws." They moved east through the canyon in single file, Wick and Patterson taking turns supporting Tommy between them. The light was getting thin, painting the rock faces in shades of copper and bronze. Every shadow was a potential ambush. Every sound, a kicked stone, the rustle of brush, brought rifles up. They were 50 yards from the Martinez homestead when a voice stopped them cold. "Stop right there." Colt turned slowly. A young man stood 20 feet behind them, a Winchester leveled at chest height, his face tight with suspicion and something that might have been fear. "Miguel Martinez," Colt said. A fractional pause. "Who's asking?" "My name's Colt Maddox. This is Evelyn Boon, widow of Sheriff Clayton Boon. We're running from Silas Granger, the same man who killed her husband, the same man who stole your mother's land." Miguel's eyes moved to Evelyn, to Noah, to the blood soaking through Tommy's trouser leg. The Winchester didn't waver, but something shifted in his expression, the calculation of a man measuring a decision that has no clean answer. "Why should I believe you?" Evelyn reached into her dress and withdrew a folded document. She held it toward him with both hands. "Because this is your mother's deed, signed 6 months after she died. Forged by Silas Granger to steal your inheritance. The Winchester dipped. Miguel took the document. His hands were steady, but his face reading the date on the signature went through a rapid sequence of expressions. Recognition, fury, grief, and something that hardened into resolve. He looked up. "Come inside," he said. "Quickly." They barely made it through the door before Pike's voice rang out from the yard. "Martinez, we know you're in there. You're harboring fugitives. Send them out or we burn you out." 8 riders, well-armed, positioned to cover every exit. Miguel pressed his back against the wall beside the window, jaw set. He looked at Colt. "I could give you up, save myself." "You could," Colt said. "I watched my mother die believing she'd failed us," Miguel said, "believing she'd lost everything through her own weakness. If that deed is forged," he looked at it again, "then she didn't fail. She was robbed." He looked up. "What do you need?" "Rifles and angles," Colt said. "We need to end this fast before they bring reinforcements. I have 3 rifles and a shotgun. We make them think we're weaker than we are." Colt moved to the window, studying the terrain with the focused calm of a man who has done this before. Granger's men were positioned with confidence, spread out, moving casually, certain of their advantage. "Draw them in close. Make them think we're panicking. Then hit them all at once." That's insane," Miguel said. "You have a better plan." Miguel looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up one of his rifles and took a position at the far window. Noah's voice came from the corner. "I can load for you. Pa taught me." "Noah," Evelyn started. "I can do it, Ma." His small voice had gone very quiet and very serious. "I'm not going to hide in the corner while everyone else fights." Evelyn looked at Colt. He held her gaze. The math was undeniable. She pulled Noah close, pressed her lips to his forehead, and held him for a single fierce moment. "You stay behind the table," she said. "You stay down. You hear me?" Noah nodded. Then he moved to position, picked up a rifle, and began methodically checking the loading the way his father had taught him, with hands that only trembled slightly. Colt turned to the window. He fired twice in deliberate sequence shots that missed by design, wide and high, the panicked shooting of men who'd run out of options. He heard one of Granger's men shout, "They can't shoot worth a damn. They're scared." And Pike took the bait. "Move in," Pike ordered. "Take the woman and the kid alive. Everyone else." The riders advanced. Colt waited. Let them come. Watch the distance close 70 yards, 50-30, close enough to see faces under hat brims, close enough for certain hits even in poor light. He said one word, "Now." All 3 rifles spoke at once. 4 of Granger's riders went down in the first 2 seconds. The others scattered, suddenly exposed. All the confidence of their advance turned inside out. Noah scrambled between positions, handing loaded rifles with focused, unhesitating efficiency. Evelyn worked her own rifle with precise, controlled shots that told Colt she'd handled guns before, not a great deal, but enough. Pike was shouting, trying to rally his men. Colt found him in his sights and squeezed the trigger, a graze across the shoulder that spun the man half around and put him on one knee. The remaining riders broke entirely. They ran for their horses, wounded and disorganized, the tactical miscalculation of overconfidence, turning a planned capture into a rout. The shooting stopped. Silence settled over the Martinez property like snow. Noah set down the last rifle, looked at his mother, and said, "Is it over for now?" Colt said. Evelyn crossed the room and gathered her son with both arms, pressing her face into his hair and holding him with the particular desperation of a mother who has just spent 20 minutes not knowing how the next 20 minutes would go. "You were so brave," she whispered. "So brave." Over her shoulder, Noah looked at Colt. Something in the boy's expression had changed subtly, almost invisibly, but there. A degree of wariness replaced by something that wasn't yet trust, but was facing in that direction. They couldn't stay. Granger would regroup, and when he came back, he'd come with everything. But Dutch arrived with the surviving hands 40 minutes later, emerging from the canyon with Tommy in better shape than Colt had feared, the wound ugly, but not mortal. Behind them, the glow from the direction of the Boon Ranch painted the horizon orange and red. The barn was gone. Maybe the house, too. Evelyn stood outside the Martinez homestead and looked at that glow for a long time without speaking. Noah stood beside her, his hand in hers. "We go to Billings," Colt said. "Tonight, under cover of dark. We take the evidence, we find the federal marshal, and we finish this." 2 days through open country, Evelyn said, with Granger between us and every mile of it. I know. Tommy can barely ride. I know that too. She turned to look at him. Her face was lit by the distant fire, the last of something she'd built with Clayton burning against a Montana sky, and she held his gaze with the same composure she'd had at the altar, the same composure she'd had every time something had tried to break her. It hadn't broken yet. He didn't think it would. All right, she said. We ride tonight. Miguel stepped forward from the doorway, his Winchester across his arm. I'm coming. You sure? Colt said. Once you cross Granger, there's no going back. Miguel looked at the forged deed in his hand, at the fire in the distance. I crossed him, he said, the minute I didn't shoot you in my yard. They loaded what they could carry. Miguel had horses, supplies, and enough ammunition to be useful. As full dark fell, they mounted and moved north, a small column of survivors riding away from the ruins of one life and toward whatever came next. Behind them, Red Hollow's lights glittered in the valley below. Somewhere in that town, Silas Granger was already reassessing, recalculating, hurrying. They'll be after us at dawn, Dutch said. Then we make good time tonight, Colt said. He took a last look south at the orange smear on the horizon where the Boone Ranch burned, and then turned his horse north and didn't look back. They rode through the night without stopping. The moon was high and generous, laying silver light across the Montana plain in long, flat sheets that helped them find the trail and expose them to anyone watching the ridgelines. Colt kept them in the draws when he could. The low ground, the shadow roads, the paths that didn't leave silhouettes against the sky. Noah rode pressed against Evelyn's back, asleep before the first hour was out, his small weight trusting against her, in a way that made her hold the reins more steadily than she might have otherwise. Tommy rode with Dutch's hand on his elbow for balance. He was pale and quiet, but his jaw was set, and he hadn't once asked to stop. At the rear, Miguel rode alone, the forged deeds wrapped in oilcloth inside his saddlebag, their presence there like a loaded gun. Everything they needed to end this, and everything Granger would kill them to recover. They reached the abandoned trading post 15 miles north as the first gray light was seeping into the eastern sky. It was exactly as Miguel had described, a low log structure with walls thick enough to stop a rifle round a good well in the yard and a clear view in every direction for 200 yards. They pulled inside the corral fence, got the horses watered and hidden, and posted Wick on the roof with a rifle in orders to watch the southern approach. In the dim interior of the trading post, Evelyn built a fire small enough to warm coffee without showing light through the gaps in the log walls. Noah slept on a folded saddle blanket in the corner. Tommy was laid out against the far wall, his leg redressed with clean cloth from Miguel's saddlebag, his color slightly improved by warmth and rest. Dutch was asleep, sitting up with his hat over his face. Colt found Evelyn at the fire with a tin cup in both hands, staring into the coals. You thinking about the ranch? He asked. I'm thinking about Clayton. She didn't look up. About all the things he kept from me. The tunnel I didn't know about. The investigation he never told me about. The evidence he hid. A pause. I thought I knew him, but the man I'm finding in his papers, the man who built escape routes and burned his own notes to protect his family, I'm not sure I understood him at all. He was trying to protect you. By lying to me. Her voice was even, but her hands tightened on the cup. By keeping me in the dark while he put himself directly in danger. I could have helped him. You couldn't have saved him, Colt said, quietly but without uncertainty. Granger had already decided whatever Clayton did or didn't tell you wouldn't have changed that calculation. Then whose fault is it? Granger's. Only his. She turned to face him. In the fire's light, her eyes were wet, not from grief exactly, but from the particular exhaustion that comes when you have been strong for too long in a row. I'm so tired, she said. The words came out differently than they would have a day ago, not as complaint, but as truth, the kind of person only says when they've dropped the pretense. I'm tired of holding everything together. Tired of being the one who doesn't cry in front of Noah, doesn't flinch in front of the ranch hands, doesn't show Granger's men a single moment of uncertainty. She looked at her hands. Sometimes I just want to... She didn't finish. Colt said nothing. He simply reached out and placed his hand over hers, where they wrapped around the cup. She went still. Then all at once, she let go. The composure she'd been maintaining for a week and a half through murder and forced marriage and threats and fire and flight, it came apart quietly and completely. She leaned forward and he caught her, and she sobbed against his chest with the full weight of everything she'd been carrying. He held her. He didn't say it was all right because it wasn't. He didn't offer reassurances he couldn't keep. He just held on the way you hold on to something that matters when the wind is trying to take it. When she finally pulled back, she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes and something behind them that hadn't been there before. Not gratitude exactly, but the particular vulnerability that comes when you have let someone see you fall apart and they didn't run. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really, because I can see now that it's more than the debt to Clayton." Colt took a slow breath. "When I was running when I thought my life was finished, Clayton didn't just save me. He saw something in me worth keeping. And I've spent 3 years trying to become that man, the one he thought he saw. And this is that man's choice. This is my stand," he said. "Yes." She looked at him for a long moment. Her hand came up and touched his face, brief and gentle, her thumb brushing through the rough beard at his jaw, a gesture that said something neither of them was ready to say in words. From the roof, Wick's voice dropped down, sharp and urgent. "Riders coming, south, a lot of them." Colt was on the roof beside Wick in 30 seconds. In the early morning light, the southern plain was visible for miles. What was moving across it was not a scouting party. 20, maybe more, Wick said. Miguel appeared at Colt's elbow, looking south. "That's Granger's full force." "How long?" 10 minutes, maybe 12. Colt's mind moved fast. The trading post was defensible, but not against 20 armed men with time and ammunition on their side. They'd simply wait them out or burn them out or both. 3 riflemen couldn't hold a perimeter against that kind of sustained pressure, and Tommy was in no condition to fight. "We can't hold," Dutch said from below. "No," Colt agreed. He looked at Miguel, at the saddlebag with the oilcloth-wrapped deeds, at Dutch, who was the best rider among them. "Dutch," he said, "you take Martinez and the evidence, ride north for Billings. Don't stop, don't deviate, don't wait for anything." Dutch stared at him. "And you, we hold them here, buy you time." "That's suicide, Maddox. It's necessary." Colt met the old man's eyes. "If that evidence reaches the federal marshal, everything we've done means something. If it doesn't, I won't let you die for us." Evelyn's voice from the doorway. Her chin was up, her eyes bright. "We all go. We make a run for it together. With Tommy unable to push his horse and Noah slowing the pace, we won't make 2 miles before they catch us in the open." He looked at her directly. "This is the only way that gets you and Noah to Billings. There has to be another." "Evelyn." He said her name like a decision. "I'm not dying. I'm making sure you live. There's a difference." She stared at him. Something moved behind her eyes that she didn't put words to. Miguel was already mounting his horse, the deed secure on his person. Dutch gripped Colt's hand once hard and said nothing beyond the grip itself. "Be alive when we get back," he said finally. "You stubborn bastard." "Plan on it." They went out the back of the corral, moving north at speed, keeping low and using the terrain. Colt watched them go until they dropped below the ridgeline. Then he turned and looked at Evelyn, at Noah, who had woken and was standing very still in the trading post doorway. "Come in here," Colt said. "Both of you." He spent the next 5 minutes positioning everyone, Evelyn at the east window, himself at the south, the 2 remaining hands on the roof. He explained what he needed from each of them in short, precise sentences. He told them where to aim and when to fire and what to do if the door gave way. He did not tell them it would be all right. He told them it would be hard and they would do it anyway. Granger's force arrived with the late morning sun behind them, a deliberate approach, horses at a walk, the casual confidence of 20 men moving on a position held by 4. Silas Granger himself rode at the head of the column, his dark suit immaculate despite 2 days of hard riding. He stopped 40 yards from the trading post and looked at the building with calm, surgical attention. "Maddox," he called, his voice carried easily across the silent plain. "You've cost me considerably. Men, money, time, reputation. This ends now." "You're right," Colt shouted back. "It does end, just not the way you think. Where's Martinez? Where are the documents?" "Gone, on their way to Billings right now. By tomorrow night, every federal marshal in Montana Territory will know what you've done." Granger's face, even at 40 yards, visibly changed. The smooth surface of it cracked just slightly. just enough for the thing underneath to show. Then he raised his hand, 20 guns leveled, and from the south, from behind Granger's entire column, a voice rang out across the plain like a pistol shot. "Lower your weapons in the name of the territorial law." Everyone turned. Riding hard from the south was a column of 15 men in federal marshal's badges, led by a gray-haired man with a straight back and the particular unhurried authority of someone who has spent a career walking into situations exactly like this one. Granger turned his horse. "Marshal Dawson." His voice was smooth again, immediately the professional reflex of a man who has survived many confrontations by staying calm. "This is a private dispute. This is a crime scene," Dawson said, pulling his horse to a stop 10 yards from Granger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "And you, Silas, are under arrest for land fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and the murder of Sheriff Clayton Boon." Granger's face went white. "You can't prove." "Miguel Martinez gave his testimony to our office in Billings 2 hours ago, along with documentary evidence sufficient to convene a federal grand jury." Dawson looked at Granger with the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time to say a specific thing. "Your man Pike provided additional testimony in exchange for a reduction in his charges. He was quite thorough." A pause. "Take him." The marshals moved with practiced efficiency. Granger's men, reading the math, did not resist. Granger himself sat very still on his horse as the cuffs went on, and he looked at Colt across the distance between them with something that transcended anger, a cold, contained fury, the fury of a man who has built his whole life on the conviction that he would always be the one with more cards. "This isn't over," Granger said. "Yes," Colt said, "it is." Evelyn came to stand beside him. Noah reached up and took his hand, and together the three of them watched Silas Granger led away in iron chains across the Montana plain. Marshal Dawson rode over. "Dutch reached us last night, rode straight through." He looked at Colt, then at Evelyn with the slightly softened expression of a man who has seen a lot of bad things and is glad this one turned out differently. "Lucky he made it when he did." "Yes, sir," Colt said. "Very lucky." Evelyn was crying. She was doing it silently with her face turned slightly away, the way people cry when they don't want to make it a performance. Noah had his arms around her waist and his face pressed into her side, and she bent over him like a tree in wind, graceful and strong, and only moving as much as she had to. The nightmare was over. Granger was finished. They were free. The ride back to Red Hollow was quiet. Too quiet in the way that the end of a sustained, terrible thing is always too quiet. The silence that comes when your body has been running on emergency fuel and the emergency has ended and there's nothing left but the trembling. Evelyn rode with Noah in front of her, his head leaning against her arm. She kept looking at Colt with an expression he couldn't quite read, as though she was making sure he was still there, as though she'd been afraid that if she stopped checking, he might have disappeared in the way things you need most have a tendency to disappear. The devastation hit them before they had even reached the gate. The barn was gone. Charred timbers and ash and the iron hardware of tools scattered across the blackened earth. The house was standing barely, every window and shot out, the walls pocked with bullet holes, the porch rail shattered. Years of work and love and survival marked in damage that would take months to repair. Evelyn dismounted and stood in the yard and looked at it for a long time. Noah stood beside her. "Is our home gone, Ma?" "No, baby." Her voice cracked, then steadied. "It's still here, just hurt." She put her hand on his shoulder. "We can fix hurt things." The town council arrived that evening, Mayor Hutchins at the head of a small delegation wearing the practiced expressions of men who have made several bad decisions and are trying to determine whether apology or deflection serves them better. "Mrs. Boon," Hutchins began, then corrected himself with visible discomfort. "Mrs. Maddox, terrible business. Dreadful. The whole town is shocked by Granger's actions." "Are they, Evelyn's tone was the temperature of January. "Because half of you were receiving money from him, looking the other way while families lost their homes and doing nothing when my husband tried to expose it." Hutchins had the grace to look genuinely ashamed. "The territorial governor has authorized compensation for damages. It isn't much, but get off my property." Evelyn's voice was quiet, which made it more effective than shouting. "All of you, unless you're here with lumber and nails and willing hands, you're not welcome here." The councilmen exchanged glances. One by one they rode away. Hutchins lingered. He turned his hat in his hands, and when he spoke, the pomposity was gone. Clayton was my friend, he said. I should have stood beside him. I didn't. He set an envelope on the porch rail. The governor's compensation. I know you don't want it, but the children of the families who lost their land will need advocates, something to fight with. He paused. For whatever it's worth. He rode away before Evelyn could respond. She stood looking at the envelope for a long moment. Then she picked it up. Colt found her that night in what remained of Clayton's office, sitting at the desk with a letter in her hand that she'd found tucked into a book, the last one, the one Clayton had addressed not to her, but to him. She handed it across the desk without speaking. He read it. Colt, if you are reading this, I'm gone, and you came back to help Evelyn the way I knew you would. You always were too honorable for your own good. Listen to me carefully, you don't owe me anything anymore. You never did. What I did for you 3 years ago, I did because it was right, not because I expected repayment. So don't stay out of obligation. But if you stay for another reason, if you stay because you care about her and the boy, then stay with everything you've got. They deserved that. You deserve that. Don't let guilt or duty chain you. Choose freely, or don't choose at all. Clayton. Colt read it 3 times. He set it down carefully and looked at Evelyn across the desk. He knew, she whispered. Yeah. Before he died, he was already planning for this. Her voice was unsteady. He chose you. He couldn't have known, maybe not the details, but he knew he was in danger. And when he thought about who might come, who he could trust to come, he thought of you. She held his gaze. Why do you think that is? Because Clayton saw something in me that I'm still trying to be, Colt thought. He should have said something careful, something measured. Instead, he said what was true. I don't know how to not stay, he said. I came here to pay a debt, and somewhere between that church and this room that stopped being the reason. Evelyn's breath caught. Then what's the reason? She asked him quietly. He looked at her across the desk in the lamplight in the ruins of everything and said the thing he hadn't planned to say for a long time yet. You, he said, and Noah, and this place, and the feeling of belonging to something instead of just passing through it. She stood, walked around the desk, stood in front of him. Colt. I'm not Clayton, he said quickly. I'll never be him. But if you give me the chance, I'll spend every day trying to be the man you and Noah deserve. I don't want you to be Clayton. Her voice was very steady. I want you to be you. A pause. Even though I don't fully know who that is yet. We could figure that out, he said, together. A knock at the door, Dutch apologetic and urgent. Someone outside had arrived with news about the tax lien on the property. Colt looked at Evelyn. She looked at him. Whatever had been about to happen between them settled into a pause, not an ending, but a suspension. An acknowledgement on both sides that the conversation wasn't over. It had, in fact, barely started. The lawyer from Billings was a thin, spectacled man named Archer who arrived the following morning with a leather satchel in the air of someone delivering news he didn't particularly enjoy delivering. He explained it with professional precision. A tax lien had been filed on the Boon property 2 months prior, before Clayton's death, for $800 in allegedly unpaid levies. The documentation appeared to be in order. Under territorial law, if the lien was not satisfied within 30 days, the property reverted to territorial possession. When he left, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table in the particular stillness of someone who has just been hit in a place they didn't think they had left to be hit. Colt paced. It's another forgery, he said. Has to be. Granger's last card filed before he was arrested. He knew that even if he went down, he could still take the ranch. The lawyer said it looks legitimate, filed properly, stamped correctly. Evelyn's voice was hollow. Even if we fight it, we can't do it in 30 days. Not without money we don't have. I have savings. He stopped pacing. From trail work. About $500. Colt, it's not charity, he said, and he heard the roughness in his own voice, the thing that made it sound like more than practicality. It's an investment. In this place, in what we're building. The last word came out before he'd thought about it. We. The kitchen went very still. He heard what he'd said, saw her hear it too. We, she repeated, softly. Yeah, he said. We, if you'll have me. Evelyn stood. She walked toward him slowly, the way you approach something you've wanted for longer than you've admitted to yourself, and stopped in front of him with 2 feet of charged air between them. You don't have to do this, she said. Your debt is paid. Everything you promised Clayton, it's done. You could leave tonight and no one in the world would blame you. I would blame me. Then he said the thing that had been building for days in the space between them. Because somewhere between that church and this kitchen, it stopped being about Clayton. It started being about the way you stand up when everything's trying to knock you down. The way you cover Noah with your body in a burning room. The way you sit across from me at night with those papers and you don't give up, even when giving up would be the rational thing. He looked at her. You made me want to stop drifting. I don't know how to say that without it sounding like something else, but that's what's true. Her eyes glistened. She pressed her lips together, composing herself. I don't want you here because you can't leave, she said. I want you here because you choose to be. Then I choose it. The kitchen door crashed open. Noah stood in the frame with Colt's saddlebag hanging from both hands and red-rimmed eyes. You were packing, he said. His voice was stripped to the bone. I went to the bunkhouse and your bag was packed. You're leaving. Colt's chest went cold. He had been packing that morning before the lawyer, before any of this. He'd been packing because he hadn't trusted himself to stay without being sure he was wanted. Noah. The boy threw the saddlebag. It hit the floor between them and slid to a stop against the wall. Everyone leaves, Noah said, and the fury in his voice was a lid on top of something much more frightened. Everyone always leaves. He turned and ran for the stairs. His door slammed hard enough to shake the ceiling. Colt looked at Evelyn. Go, she said quietly. He found Noah in the barn loft. Of course he did. The boy was curled in the hay with his back to the ladder shaking. Colt climbed up and sat a few feet away and let the silence breathe for a moment. You were going to leave without saying goodbye, Noah said without turning. Yeah, Colt said. I was. Why don't you like us? It's not that. Then what? Colt looked at his hands. When I was about your age, my own father left. Just walked out one morning and didn't come back. And I spent years trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, what I could have said or done differently to make him stay. He paused. I swore I'd never make a kid feel that way, but I also swore I'd never get close enough to any that leaving would be the kind of thing that hurt them. Because if you don't care about people, you can't hurt them by going. Noah turned over. His face was wet. But you do care about us. Yeah, Colt said. I do. And that scared me more than anything Granger ever put in front of me. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, Pa used to say that being scared just means something matters. That brave people aren't the ones who don't feel scared. They're the ones who feel it and do the right thing anyway. Colt's throat tightened. Your pa was a smart man. So are you going to be brave or are you going to run? The question in that small voice in that dusty loft was the most direct thing anyone had said to him in years. He looked at Noah, this 5-year-old boy who had lost his father and been sold a stranger, and still somehow was capable of offering Colt another chance at something he decided a long time ago he didn't deserve. I'm going to be brave, Colt said. If you'll let me. Let you what? Stay, be part of this family. Not as your pa, nobody can replace him, but as someone who's here, who isn't going anywhere. Noah studied him with eyes that were old and young at the same time. You promise because if you break it, I'll hate you forever. That's fair. A long pause. The wind moved through the slats in the barn wall. Somewhere outside, Dutch was talking to the horses in the low private way he had. Then Noah moved across the hay and leaned against Colt's shoulder. Not dramatically, not with words, just leaned. Colt put his arm around the boy's small frame and held on. You're not a stranger anymore, Noah said quietly. You're mine. Colt's eyes burned. He didn't try to stop them. They stayed like that until Evelyn called them for supper, and then they went together. The bank confrontation happened 3 days before the lien deadline. Colt and Evelyn walked into the Red Hollow Savings and Trust, together with $780 between them. Colt's $500 the last cattle sale proceeds, and $200 borrowed from Miguel Martinez, who had pressed the money into Evelyn's hands the previous afternoon with a simple, "My mother would want this." The clerk Simmons was a narrow-faced man who pushed the money back across the counter with the practiced regret of someone who has been told exactly how to push money back. I'm sorry, Mr. Maddox, we can't accept partial payment. The lien requires $800 in full. We're $20 short, Colt said. The law is clear. The law is convenient, Evelyn said, stepping up beside him, when it serves men like Granger. That lien was filed fraudulently. We all know it. You know it. She looked at Simmons without blinking. Granger is in federal custody. His influence over this town is finished. So you can either accept this payment in good faith, or you can explain to the federal marshal's office why you're obstructing the settlement of a fraudulent debt. A door opened behind the counter. Bank manager Wessex emerged, portly, guilty-eyed, wearing the particular discomfort of a man who has made choices he's been living with ever since. He looked at the money on the counter. He looked at Evelyn. He looked at the small crowd that had gathered at the bank windows watching. The territorial governor has authorized discretionary action in cases directly affected by Granger's fraud, Wessex said carefully. I believe this qualifies. He looked at Simmons. We'll accept the $708 and the remaining $20 will be recorded as an administrative adjustment. Simmons opened his mouth. We'll accept it, Wessex said again, and this time it was not open for discussion. He counted the money himself. He stamped the receipt with his own hand. He held it out to Evelyn. The lien is satisfied, he said. The property is yours. Evelyn took the receipt with both hands. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up at Wessex. Clayton was your friend, she said. Yes. The word came out with weight. He was, and I failed him. This doesn't change that. But it's a start. He held her gaze. It's a start. Outside the bank, the small crowd that had gathered broke into spontaneous applause, not a large sound, not a triumphant one, but real. Miguel Martinez was there grinning. Dutch and the hands were there whooping. Noah had his face pressed against the bank window and erupted onto the sidewalk the moment the door opened. We did it. He grabbed Colt and Evelyn, both wrapping his arms around as much of each of them as he could reach. We really did it. We did, Colt confirmed, and for the first time in the entire ordeal, he let himself feel the full weight of that. That night, Red Hollow celebrated. Someone produced a fiddle. Someone else brought whiskey. The town square filled with lantern light and music, and by the time the moon was high, half of Red Hollow was dancing. Families who'd lost property gathered with families who hadn't, and the conversation that passed between them was the beginning of something. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the acknowledgement that something had been broken and could be repaired. Evelyn found Colt standing at the edge of the square, watching. Dance with me, she said. I don't dance. You didn't kiss either until you did. He let her lead him into the square. He stepped on her feet twice and nearly knocked into Dutch once. She laughed, a full, real laugh, unguarded, the first he'd heard from her, that didn't carry sorrow in its edges, and guided him through the steps with the patience of someone who had decided at some point during the last 2 weeks that this particular man's deficiencies were worth working around. You're terrible at this, she said. I warned you. I don't care. They swayed together in the Montana night while the fiddle played and the town moved around them, and Colt thought about how strange it was to have come here to pay a debt and found himself indebted to an entirely different thing. To a woman's stubborn courage, to a boy's willingness to trust again, to the particular feeling of standing somewhere and not wanting to be anywhere else. Dutch appeared at his elbow during a break in the music, his expression carrying a gravity that didn't match the celebration around them. Got something to tell you, Dutch said. Pike talked, gave the marshals a list of names in exchange for a lighter sentence. A pause. Hutchkins and Caldwell were taking kickbacks for every property Granger acquired. They knew about the land fraud. They knew about Clayton. Colt went still. They knew when they forced the marriage. Yeah, they were probably hoping you'd take the pressure fold cell quick and disappear. When you didn't, Dutch spread his hands. Colt found Hutchkins near the punch table laughing at something his wife had said. He took the mayor by the arm and walked him into the dark at the edge of the square. Hutchkins went white before Colt had said a single word. Clayton came to me, the mayor said, the bluster completely gone. 3 weeks before he died, told me what he'd found, asked for my help. A long pause. I was afraid. Granger owned my debts, threatened to ruin me. I told Clayton I'd think about it. His voice broke slightly. 2 days later, he was dead. And you told yourself it was a coincidence. I knew it wasn't. Hutchkins' eyes were wet. I knew it wasn't, and I kept quiet anyway. And I'll carry that until the day I die. Colt looked at him for a long, measuring moment. He wanted to do a dozen things, none of them kind. Instead, he said, "The marshals will come for you. When they do, you testify about everything and everyone. You don't run, you don't hide, and you don't make it harder for the families who lost their land to get justice." He stepped back. "That's the only thing you can do now that means anything." He walked away before Hutchkins could respond. Evelyn was waiting for him at the edge of the square. "What happened?" she asked. "Truth happened," he said. "Finally." She took his hand. "Does it help?" "No," he said honestly, "but it means Clayton didn't die for nothing." She leaned against his side and they stood together in the warm dark, listening to the fiddle, watching Noah run circles with a pack of other children, his laughter cutting clean and bright above the general noise. It was the first time Colt had heard the boy laugh like that, without caution, without grief underneath it. And it did something to the inside of his chest that he didn't have words for. "I'm tired," Evelyn said quietly, "of fighting, of performing strength I'm not sure I have. I just want to be tired without it meaning something." "Then rest," he said. "I've got you." She turned in his arms and looked up at him. "I need to know something," she said. "Ask. Are you staying because of guilt, because you feel responsible, because you think Clayton's ghost is watching?" She held his gaze steadily. "Or is there another reason?" He looked at her, at the woman who had screamed at an altar and stood her ground against 20 armed men and cried against his chest in a burning trading post and guided his useless feet through a dance he'd never learned. At the woman who made him feel for the first time in years that staying somewhere was not a trap but a choice. "I love you," he said. The words came out simply, without preamble, without armor. "I don't know when it happened, but I do, and I choose you. Every day that you'll let me." Evelyn's eyes filled. She didn't look away. "I love you too," she said, "and I choose you even though you can't dance. Especially because I can't dance," he said. She laughed, that full, real, unguarded laugh again, and then she kissed him there, in the Montana night, in front of half the town, in the middle of a celebration that was partly about justice and partly about survival, and partly about the small, persistent miracle of people finding each other in the ruins of terrible things. When they finally separated, Noah's voice found them from across the square. "You can stop kissing now and come tell me a story." They went inside together. The months that followed were the kind that don't make for dramatic telling, but are perhaps the most important ones, the months of rebuilding in every sense. The barn rose from its foundation one board at a time. The fences went back up straight, the cattle were recovered and counted, and the losses documented for the governor's compensation fund. 3 new hands were hired, including a young man whose family had been among those defrauded by Granger. Colt gave him work for the same reason Clayton had once given Colt work, without requiring explanation or gratitude in exchange. The Territorial Land Oversight Committee, established by the governor's office in response to the fraud, offered Evelyn a seat as Red Hollow's representative. She accepted on the condition that the committee have genuine enforcement authority, not simply the appearance of it. The governor by that point was not in a position to argue. She traveled to Helena once a month. She came back each time with stories and new arguments, and an energy that had found its proper channel. She was, Colt observed with quiet pride, exactly the kind of person who made institutions better, simply by refusing to accept the way things had always been done. Miguel Martinez's mother's land was returned to him, the first of 18 properties recovered through the committee's work in its first 6 months. Pike's testimony helped convict not only Granger, but 4 additional co-conspirators. Hutchkins and Caldwell surrendered to the marshals, as Colt had told Hutchkins they would, and testified in exchange for reduced sentences that still cost them everything they'd built. Granger himself received a federal sentence of 30 years. He was transferred to Territorial Prison on a Tuesday in October, and the Red Hollow Gazette reported it on page 1 below a photograph of the courthouse steps above a notice about the fall cattle auction. Life continued. One Sunday afternoon, Colt found Noah at Clayton's grave. The boy had brought wildflowers, the yellow ones that grew along the north fence line in autumn, and laid them at the base of the headstone. He stood with his hat in his hands and his head bowed in the particular private way of someone having a conversation he doesn't need an audience for. Colt waited at the gate. When Noah turned and saw him, he didn't seem surprised. "You should come," Noah said. Colt walked to the grave. He stood beside the boy and read the headstone, Clayton Boon husband, father sheriff hero, and felt the complex layered weight of owing a debt to a dead man that you could never fully discharge and being grateful for it anyway. "We should add something," Noah said. "Something about how he changed things, about how what he did mattered even after he was gone." "What did you have in mind?" Noah thought for a moment, then said, "He changed lives by seeing the good in others." Colt looked at the headstone, at the boy, at Evelyn, who had come quietly from the house and now stood a few feet away, her hand resting at her heart. "That's perfect," he said. They stood together at the grave for a young time, the three of them, the family that had been built from loss and stubbornness, and one forced wedding in a church where nobody clapped. The family that was real now in all the ways that mattered. Noah reached up and took Colt's hand. "Pa," he said. Colt looked down. "Yeah, son. Thanks for staying." Colt tightened his grip around the boy's small fingers. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Above them, the Montana sky stretched clear and cold, and impossibly wide the way it does in October, when the summer haze is gone and the world looks like it was made that morning, specifically for this. Evelyn stepped close and took his other hand. The three of them stood there together while the wind moved through the grass and Clayton Boon's name was engraved in stone, and the afternoon light went long and gold across the land they had fought for and chosen and kept. Later that evening on the porch, Evelyn leaned against his chest and watched the Beartooth Range take on the colors of dusk. "You know what I realized," she said. "What? The town council forced us together thinking they were managing a problem, protecting an asset, keeping order." She looked up at him. "And instead they gave us this." He kissed the top of her head. "We should probably thank them." She laughed. "Don't push it." Noah came running from the yard covered in dirt, grinning widely. "Dutch says tomorrow we start on the new fence line. Can I help?" "Of course you can," Colt said. Noah hugged them both, the full-body, unself-conscious hug of a child who has decided he is safe, and then ran off to relay the verdict to Dutch. Evelyn watched him go. "He's happy," she said softly. "So am I," Colt said. And he meant it in a way he hadn't meant anything in years fully, without the caveat of waiting for it to be taken away. She turned in his arms and looked up at him in the fading light, and what he saw in her face was everything the last weeks had cost her, and everything they'd built from the wreckage, grief and resilience and love. They three layered and inseparable and honest. "One ranch," she said quietly, "one family, one choice at a time. One kiss that changed everything," he said. She smiled, the real one, the unguarded one, the one that changed his whole understanding of what a smile was for. "Then let's make it count," she said. He kissed her in the last of the Montana light, and inside the house, Noah was telling Dutch a very dramatic story about fence posts, and the mountains were going purple at their peaks, and the new barn stood solid against the sky, and somewhere under the north pasture grass, Clayton Boon's memory ran with the cattle and the creek water and the clean cold wind. And it was enough. It was in the end exactly enough.